Welcome to EVONA Origin Stories, the space podcast where we bring you extraordinary leaders from within the sector as we explore their fascinating stories of early life, career, and how they broke into the space industry. Today on the podcast, we're welcoming a very special guest, Andrew Aldrin. Despite being the son of Apollo 11 astronaut Buzz Aldrin, Andrew didn't always have his sights set on a career in the space industry. In this episode, we discuss the various stops on his route into the sector, including a brief stint as a van decorator. Andrew's journey has led him to build an incredibly impactful career of his own, making a significant impact within the space industry. In addition to his work in the private sector, Andrew has been deeply involved in academia, currently serving as Program Coordinator of the Masters of Space Operations program at the Embry Riddle Aeronautical University. This is a unique online program intended to prepare grad students as well as mid-career professionals for careers in space. Andrew's passion for the space industry has also led him to become involved in numerous charitable organisations, including the Space Foundation as well as the Astronaut Scholarship Foundation. This commitment to space education and outreach is further highlighted by his role as president of the Aldrin Family Foundation, an organisation dedicated to inspiring future generations to pursue careers in space and STEM fields. Join us as we sit down with Andrew to discuss his remarkable career journey, as well as how he's continuing his father's legacy through his work, academic pursuits, and philanthropic efforts. Stay tuned. You don't want to miss this one. Hello.
Hello, Maya. It's Maya, right?
It is Miya. I appreciate that. Really excited to speak with you today. Thank you so much for taking the time out to join me. I'm really excited to hear about your space origin story. I know you've got quite a unique origin story and path into the industry. I know that a lot of people we have on here, their love for space started at a young age, but I think you had quite a different influence from a very young age, which I think will be, really excited to kind of hear about how, the impact that had on you from a young age and how that got you inspired and thinking about space and got you, to where you are today. And a very, you're a very
or not. We'll talk about it. I don't want to tell my story. I don't want to tell my story too soon.
Yeah. Well, no, perfect. Well, then maybe a good place to start then is the early days of Andrew Aldrin. So just to give the listeners kind of a feel for you and, where you've been, talk us through kind of early life, school, college, where you grew up, and then I guess eventually how you found your way into your early career.
It was interesting growing up the son of an astronaut, but kind of interesting in a way that most people don't think about it. So where I grew up, you literally could not swing a dead cat in my elementary school without hitting an astronaut's kid. They were everywhere. So we lived at the end of a street, and so it's a cul-de-sac, and so we had a lot that was kind of pie shaped. So there were 5 houses along the back, and 3 of them were astronauts. So they were everywhere. So the upshot of that is it just wasn't a big deal to have a father who was an astronaut. That just wasn't. And so that probably was a positive thing, because I grew up thinking that space was kind of normal, and that's what we did. And we talked about space all the time, because my dad doesn't really talk about anything but space anyway. So one of the interesting little snippets is, so when my dad went to the moon, I kind of, we had talked about it, and I understood everything about the mission, and I was pretty confident in anything that NASA could do. I mean, I'm 11 years old, right? So I'm not all that smart, but I think I'm pretty smart, because you're 11 years old and that's your job, right? And so there's my dad, and what's my dad's job? My dad's job is to embarrass his 11-year-old son. right? So he's on the moon, and he had told me that, you don't walk or run on the moon. He said, you kind of hop, and he was trying to figure out what the best way to hop was. And so he's hopping around on the moon, and there's this cable that's going out to one of the instruments. And I'm convinced that my dad's going to trip over that cable, fall flat on his face in front of 300 million people, but most importantly, in front of my classmates. Right. And my only hope for salvation was it was the middle of summer and they might forget. But I mean, honestly, that was one of the things that was going through my mind. And so it gives you an idea of how kind of normal it was. And so I grew up thinking I was normal. And then when we moved out to California and things, I realized it was sort of a little bit different. But there are movie stars in California, so they got all the attention, and that, it was okay. So my career, I followed my passion. And I started out when I started at UCLA, I was going to be a lawyer, and I thought that's what I wanted to do. And then I actually dropped out of UCLA and started customizing vans because I thought that was cool. That was a really bad idea.
That's cool.
That was a really bad idea. And so I went back to school at the University of California, Santa Barbara, and I had just a series of professors who got me interested in various subjects. I got interested in political science. I got interested in international relations. And then I got interested in the Soviet Union because it was fascinating at the time. This is, we're now in sort of the early 80s, and it's the Cold War, and the Soviet Union is just this mysterious place. So I became really passionate about understanding that, and then went on to get a PhD in political science, but I was studying the Soviet Union, and I was working at the Rand Corporation. And so I was just in this wonderful environment, the smartest people in the world about the most mysterious subject in the world. And I wrote my dissertation on how the Soviet Union beat the United States into space, which was a fascinating story because the conventional wisdom is that Stalin and Khrushchev just ordered this program, and the scientists dutifully constructed it, and it couldn't have been further from the truth. The leadership didn't really know what space was. Khrushchev, the first time he saw a rocket, thought it was a cigar. Literally, it's the biggest cigar. I mean, he had absolutely no knowledge of it. And what happened is that the scientists, led mostly by Sergei Korolev, they were space enthusiasts. They wanted to go into space, and so they would do anything they could to sell a program to the leadership. And initially, they sold it as an anti-aircraft program, and then they sold it as a ballistic missile program. And all along, they were building a really good launch vehicle, but it was absolutely useless as an anti-aircraft system, and really kind of a lousy intercontinental ballistic missile. But it was a great space launch vehicle. And so they sold the program, or didn't really sell it. It wasn't that they actively concealed it, but they designed a program, a rocket, which is where it all started, which was a great launch vehicle and a lousy ICBM. And so it was a story of entrepreneurship that really fascinated me. And so that was great. And I was pursuing lots of other things, trying to understand how the Soviet system worked. And it was it was an incredible time, because this is as the Berlin Wall is falling, and the access that I had was astonishing. People would openly talk and fly me around on their corporate jets. It was just an incredible time to learn what was going on. And then, of course, the Soviet Union went away, which was lousy for my career, right? And I ended up getting recruited into aerospace by a couple of companies, and so I thought, I would do aerospace for a while, and it turns out I had a pretty good time. But here I was, a guy with a PhD in political science, and I ended up I was at TRW for a while, then went to Boeing, and ended up at Boeing as executive director in charge of advanced programs, strategy, and business development for their NASA business and the rest of their civil and commercial business, and then moved on to the launch business, and then did the same thing when we merged our launch business with Lockheed Martin at ULA, and then left to run a company called Moon Express, which was building a spacecraft to go to the moon. And it didn't stay there for long. It was sort of one of the Silicon Valley stories of founder brings someone in to run the company, founder and the guy who's coming in don't get along. But after a year, I learned a lot, and that was great. But the point is that throughout my career, I was pursuing my passion and was able to do things that I really wanted to do. And I'm not sure I would recommend my career path to anyone else. And probably I had interesting opportunities because of who my dad was, but that kind of cut both ways, and interesting ways. I think there's many people who created barriers for me than people that kind of helped me along. But anyway, it was great fun. And then I tried to retire and ended up helping my dad start what was the Aldrin Space Institute at Florida Tech, and started up a Center for Space Entrepreneurship with the International Space University, which was a very, very cool program. And that really that sparked my passion again for teaching and developing the next generation of leaders and entrepreneurs. And recently left Florida Tech and now started a program at Embry Riddle University, which is we can talk about that more in a while, which is going really quite nicely. And I'm running the Aldrin Family Foundation, which does space education. So that's the 5-minute version of everything I've done for the last 50 years, I think.
It's an incredible story. You've had such an interesting route through the sector, and it's also interesting, that despite who your dad was, it's not like you instantly had this leg up right into the space industry as soon as you could. You went and did your own thing. You were customizing vans, you were looking to be a lawyer, and you kind of eventually, as you worked your way through, as you said, following your passion and saying yes to opportunities. It's interesting that, you obviously have to have shared passions, and you kind of organically found yourself in the industry, and just once you were in it, you realized that it was for you, and now you're in a place where you've been able to exact so much positive change and all these, I know you're sat on the board of a lot of like charitable organizations. You're, as you said, heavily involved in kind of education and academia and nurturing kind of the next generation of talent for the sector, which is really interesting to be talking about on the podcast, because that is it's one of the main motives of us starting that. And it's interesting, to see how all of these passions and interests kind of fed through to each other. Your role at the Embry Riddle Aeronautical University is really interesting. I've had a look into that. So maybe now would be a good chance for you to tell the listeners a bit about that and what the program offers there.
Sure. I want to jump back to something you said, because I think it's really important. It's saying yes to opportunity. And particularly early in people's career, saying yes, I think I won't say whatever comes up, say yes to it, but think about, I think creating momentum is really important. And sometimes it's not exactly in the direction you want to be moving, but just establishing some velocity and momentum is important, because that will make it easier when the next opportunity comes along. And today that's particularly important, because the job market is so fluid and so much is changing, and expectations are that you don't stay in a job for your entire at a single company for your entire career. And so it's all that much easier to find an opportunity, get some momentum, and then move to other things. And I've got several students of mine and other students that I've been mentoring over the years. And that's the hardest thing, is getting that momentum started. And so, you don't want to pick a job selling furniture unless it's on the space station. But there are lots of things that wouldn't necessarily be the first step that you want to take on your career path. And sometimes it's better to get some momentum. The one thing I will caution people on is get to know your boss a little bit beforehand. The one thing you do not want to get caught up in is a toxic environment. And it really starts with whoever you're going to be working with. So, Embry Riddle. During COVID, I was still running the Center for Entrepreneurship, Space Entrepreneurship. We're running programs over the summer. We had to go online completely in 21, and in 22 we went, or is it 20? Let me get my year straight. It was 20. We had to go completely online. 21, we did a hybrid program, but when we went completely online, actually. I had a great cohort, and some of the students that came out of that cohort have gone on to do great things. And so it occurred to me that online learning really can work. I think what we did in 21 was we created a hybrid program where we had 8 weeks online, and then 2 weeks we went to the visitor complex at the Kennedy Space Center, and that was a beautiful program structure. But Florida Tech didn't really adapt very well to COVID, and they were sort of determined to go back to doing things the way they were doing things. And I got in touch with Embry Riddle, and at first they just said, "Great, we'd love to have you come and teach a few courses." And then said, "You know what, we just want to start a program." So we did, and we started it in 22. Yeah, 22. Yes, in 22, and we've already got 500 students in the program now. And we've been operating for about a year and a half. And so this program, it really does work. And what it is it's a completely online program, and it's asynchronous, which means we have to essentially write the book for the course in advance. And along with the book, I tape lectures, at least one lecture for every module every week. I do a lot of things on video because other than an hour or so a week where I invite students to come and just interact with me, it's something where I have to give them what they want, and the rest we do by email. And so I wasn't sure how well it was going to work, but I have to tell you that the quality of the work I get out of the students, I'll say I get it. The quality of the work the students produce is the best I've seen in my career, the best. And it's amazing how much work they put into it. And, it's always sort of, you get the top 20% do good things, great, typically, and then the bottom 20% they're just there to get a grade. Although with space courses, you think at the Center for Space Entrepreneurship, everyone was a space cadet. And so they were all kind of dedicated. But the top 20% of what I have at Embry Riddle is so good, and they work so hard. And I don't know if it's just because it's online, but the quality of their research is just excellent. The other thing I'll say is it's a lot more work for me, because every week, we're having discussions and I'm grading short essay questions and things like that. And they've got a class project. And so I'm working with them throughout the entire term to produce a great product, and that probably helps, because it's not like, in my courses in the past, I would give them an opportunity to present their paper and then turn in the real paper as a couple of weeks later after I comment on it. But in this case, I get to comment early and often, which helps to shape things a little bit. So I think it's a fantastic channel for delivering things. I think the program structure is pretty good too. The way we've set it up is, well, let me actually back up and talk a little bit about what motivated the program and who our target audience is, if you will, our customers, clients, our students. But we actually talk to a lot of executives, government executives, industry executives, about what they were looking for in space. And one of the things that came out was that we do a good job of training engineers. And in the United States, we do a great job of training aerospace engineers. I think in other countries, it's less so the case. Maybe pretty good in France, okay in Germany. I know less about the UK, but my suspicion is that it's probably not, you don't have as many aerospace engineering programs, but we do a good job of training engineers. I'll say generally worldwide. What we do a less good job of is training people to understand the business and actually to be able to make decisions. And in today's world, particularly in the startup community, the startup space community, decisions get pushed down to a very low level. And in order to make decisions at a lower level, you have to understand the whole ecosystem. And this is what's coming out from executives. And I have one guy in particular that spare him the ignominy of having me mention him on a podcast, but he's running a program with about 3,000 people at Kennedy Space Center that does a lot of systems engineering work and things like that. And he says that, you know, I make a lot of decisions that aren't really technical decisions, and they may not be good engineering decisions. My people need to understand, my managers need to understand why I'm making those decisions, because I can't have them questioning me because I'm making a decision which isn't a great technical decision. I know that. They need to understand that there's a lot more to decision making than strictly engineering. And so this has come out with a lot of people we've talked to. And so that kind of drove us to create the program the way we created it. And so the way we created this program is I'll also say that it's an evolutionary process. When I first came there, we had a bunch of courses that had something to do with space, and we cobbled them together, and I quickly developed a couple of new courses, and we called that, we started building the degree program. But over the course of the last year, we've developed, I think, 8 new courses. And so we've got the structure pretty much in place. And here's the way it looks. There's 4 courses that are kind of the foundation, if you will. And so there's a course that looks at technology and systems, which really looks a lot at how you tie technology and systems to cost, because it's very important to understand what things cost. The other is, I call it Survey the Space Ecosystem, and that's a quick look at all of the different market segments in space. And then there's Space Policy and Law, which looks at the structures, not just the policies themselves, but the real structures of several different nations, and how what is, if you will, the iceberg under the water that supports the space program. We can all talk about the space programs of India, the UK, whomever, but you need to understand everything that supports that. And then there's a course on program management. I think that's it. Yeah. So those are kind of foundational. And then on top of that are what I call industry verticals. And so for launch industry, communications, geospatial, and human spaceflight, we have courses that teach students what happens in that whole industry. And so they have projects that basically involve developing a business concept, whether it's within a company or a new start company, and take that concept all the way through to taking it to the market. But what you start with is the customer, because rocket fuel isn't kerosene. Rocket fuel is cash, and if it doesn't make sense, this is a play on American currency. If it doesn't make sense, it ain't going to make dollars. And so there has to be an intense understanding of who the customer is, why they buy something, and what the overall market is before you even get into designing a system. And so then you understand the market, you understand how you make money, which surprisingly, a lot of people don't understand how you make money in the business. I mean, what is the basic transaction? And then you get into what's the system look like to serve that market? And then finally, how do you go to market? How do you compete? All that kind of stuff. it's the same basic structure for the 4 industry verticals. And then we've got a couple of electives, a gaggle of which the students can pick from, and things like cybersecurity, habitation systems, that are a little bit more technically oriented. And that's kind of where the program Generation 1.0 stands. We'll be starting on what I'm going to call Generation 2.0, and we will develop a parallel set of courses that look like the industry verticals, but they're going to be technical. So instead of designing a business concept, what you'll design is a launch system, but you'll have to be an engineer and you have to do the engineering and design that launch system. But it's got to be a launch system that supports a particular market need. And so that's something we're going to do over the next couple of years. But I think that I think this is a good structure. It's very, very interdisciplinary. I can't tell you how many students are getting jobs because we're just getting our first students finishing this spring. But I think they'll do well, but we'll see. Anyway.
I think so too. It sounds like your this does really sound like, I think, so kind of what the kind of new and emerging understanding of the space sector is, that, it's not, as you said, it's not just rocket scientists and engineers and astronauts, and it's there's so much more beyond that. There's the business elements to it, and as you said, the operations, if you want to go as far as you say, marketing. And I think giving people who have a genuine interest of joining the sector this comprehensive outlining and understanding of the entire space ecosystem, as you said, in kind of the new environment where there's so many startups emerging, where space is kind of becoming demystified and more accessible, these diverse and kind of comprehensive skill sets, I think, are what, it's what's going to drive growth. And as you said, these people are going to be able to deal with so many elements of the business, and aside from just having the technical skills. And I think something as well with the structure of the program, having remote and online classes, again, makes it so much more accessible. And you're not, and if it was a physical location, a lot of people, for a multitude of reasons, might not be able to join you, and that could be missing out on someone who has a genuine love and a passion and would go on to do amazing things. And that's really kind of the hot topic of us really even starting this podcast, is to make space accessible for everyone. So this brings me on to something that I think you'll have a great answer for, judging from what we've spoken about so far.
First of all, you want a job in marketing for the program? I absolutely get what we're trying to do.
Oh, thank you. But yeah, so one of the as I said, the kind of hot topic at the moment, and the reason we started this, is the battle for skills and talent, and the battle to make the industry accessible, and what more we can be doing to enable that. We believe, and I'm sure you believe, and the majority of people listening to this believe, that we need to be impacting change at a much younger level across through STEM initiatives, with young children in school, to be sustaining the growth of the sector for the years to come, like it needs to do, to advance alongside humanity. I'm sure you've got some ideas and some thoughts on this. So I'd love to know what you think we should be doing differently across the industry. And as I said, at STEM and STEAM level, if we want to start bringing the arts into it.
So there are kind of two things. One is flipping the coin on the other side, and that is, at a young age, space excites kids. I mean, kids love two things, particularly boys, I guess. Maybe it's a little bit gender, but actually it's not. But anyway, kids love two things. They love space and they love dinosaurs. And they get over dinosaurs. Although I am hopeful, if we find just the right kind of bones on Mars, maybe we can bring the two together, and then we will really be doing something. But what it does is it's an incredible attractor. So one of the things the foundation does is we try and get kids at fairly young age, it's called third grade, but particularly as we get into middle grade, get them into the classroom talking about space. You've got these huge Mars and moon maps, get them running around Mars and the moon with real curricula, and get them excited and curious. And maybe some of these go into space and maybe they don't. But once they are curious, then they start looking at other things, and they develop a passion for learning, and maybe they go on to something completely different. That doesn't matter. It's great thing is just getting kids who aren't curious because of the way our education system sort of pounds things into their heads. We're getting better. But so space can be used that way. The other thing is to start kids developing at a young age, developing not just a passion for space, but a knowledge, and starting to understand where their place in space can be. And so I think one of the things that's really important is getting students, and this is now we're kind of talking about students that are maybe 15 to 18 years old, working together on real projects. And one of the things that has fundamentally changed about space, and I think maybe more so, this may be more important than anything else having to do with reusable rockets, satellite constellations, all of that stuff is almost trivial compared to what I call the democratization of space. And that is, when I grew up, 3 people flew to the moon, 2 of them got down, and a bunch of people helped them, but still it was there were thousands, actually hundreds of thousands of people working on it, and everybody else was watching. And that's the way it went for decades. But today it's about participating. It's not just watching. So, I mean, we've got kids in school developing and building and flying satellites. Kids are going to grow up today and they're going to apply for jobs on the moon. And it's not jobs as an astronaut. It's going to be a job fixing robots. It's going to be jobs. I had a kid come up to me and say, I want to be a barista on the moon. And I thought about it. I go, you know what? There will be baristas on the moon.
100%.
No, it is, but it's space for everyone. And so it's not going to happen overnight, but it's a fundamental shift in what happens in space. And so it's not about studying to be an astronaut or a program manager, engineer / there are going to be lots and lots of things that are going to be happening in space as we start to move from exploration to development. And I think the moon is one place where I think it's likely to happen over time. I can't tell you, don't ask me when. I can tell you what things need to happen for us to actually start developing resources on the moon for sale to other people in space. The notion of selling stuff on Earth is just, I can't find many use cases for that, but that's kind of a separate subject. But anyway, I think that's one of the things that has fundamentally changed, and it's not just about being an engineer. That another slice to this thing is it's not just about being in big companies. There are going to be lots and lots of companies that aren't necessarily building hardware, that are actually using data from space systems, that are space dependent companies that need to understand the space ecosystem and what's out there and how to work with that ecosystem, because that's going to provide you with your raw material for whatever business information or other products that you're going to create, products and services. And that is, we talk about the $1 trillion space economy, which is, it's a little bit creative how you have to get what you have to believe, not believe, but what you count as part of the space economy. But if you look at the $1 trillion economy, 800 billion of that is applications. It's stuff you do with data from space only, and it's vastly different from the hardware part of it. And that's where the growth is going to be. That's where the really interesting jobs are going to be. And we don't really know what a lot of those are going to look like, but we know that you need to understand the ecosystem if you're going to do well in that environment.
Yeah, absolutely. That's something that we definitely massively promote here, is something that I find so interesting. And it's something that hadn't really crossed my mind. And I love kind of saying it to people, that the amount of companies out there which are technically space companies, Uber Eats, all these kind of delivery and the ride sharing apps, and even as far as Pokemon Go, it's completely space powered. And I think it is, like you said, it's kind of opening up people's minds to the full ecosystem, and as we said, demystifying the fact that it's not just, scientists, engineers and astronauts. And I think, like we said, giving children early on the hands-on experience, letting them get their hands dirty, build, see what is possible, even if they're not going to go on and do that specific thing. It's about getting them, as we said, curious, interested, involved, thinking about the possibilities and, not having girls when they get to age 13. I think that's the statistic that when they turn 13, that's when they lose interest in STEM activities because of how it's presented to them and, how it's the way that they're maybe not getting as involved. But I think these, as we said, these hands-on activities, opening them up to the entire sector, showing them how much they could be a part of that and how many different skills they could bring to the industry that is eventually going to drive it forward, I think is something so important that we really, really hope to do kind of through conversations like this.
So one of the things that it's a little bit harder to do in our program, but if I had to pick a skill that may be the most important skill, it's communication. And because simply being a brilliant scientist or a brilliant engineer is useless unless you can communicate the idea. It's absolutely useless. And the people that are successful are the ones that are successful communicators. They may or may not be great engineers or great scientists, but you must be a great communicator if you're going to be successful. And it's these are things that we try to stress in the program. Students give, most weeks, students will do a presentation. Students must write a paper, and being able to communicate effectively is probably the most important and maybe most challenging things that I try and stress is it's really difficult to get students to, it's not hard to get them to gather lots of data and give you lots of what's happening and maybe even how it's happening, but getting them to the why is really, really challenging. And it's something, the critical thinking skill behind that, of what is important to communicate is really hard. And that's something that I think, with what you're doing at EVONA, is it EVONA or EVONA?
EVONA.
EVONA. What you're doing at EVONA, we need to find ways of emphasizing and developing that particular skill set because it is so important. It is so important. And it's not part of STEM. It's not even part of STEAM, which is why I just go, I don't care whether you're talking about STEAM or STEM or Uncle Harry, just do the things that are important and don't be governed by somebody's cute acronym.
Yeah, I completely agree. We actually had Christina Corp, who I'm sure you're familiar with, on the.
Christina has been a very good friend of the family over the years.
Yeah. We had her and Nicole Stott. We had a double episode. It was a great one. It was about 2 episodes ago. And Christina said something about, which I thought was so interesting. She said this gets a lot of gasps on panels, but she said the STEM movement was a mistake because, it's communicating to these children and these young people that, all these amazing, incredible things that are possible if you open your mind to it. And if you're good at science, technology, engineering, and maths. And she said that, it's turning a lot of people off from that. And I to be honest, I think she was completely right. It's slightly controversial at first, but when you think about it, she's completely right. And as you said, I think it's really interesting that you would say communication is the #1 skill because that's something that I think a lot of people wouldn't think of, but you're completely right. And it's getting to the why and it's understanding why we're doing things and the importance of doing things and not just doing it for the sake of it and for the sake of ticking boxes. I think that's something that's really, really important. And I would just kind of sticking on the topic of kind of, the importance of the both technical and non-technical skills in the sector. What advice would you give directly if someone came up to you and asked you, I want to transition into the space sector? What advice would you give to people from either a technical or a non-technical background that are really looking to kind of take that next step and pursue a career in the sector?
Yeah, so that is a really kind of key point, and there's a juncture. One of the things I want to start by saying is I think it's very important for students to develop some kind of foundational skill set, whether it's engineering, whether it's law, whether it's business, but some foundational skill set that they can say, this is a skill set that I understand and I know these tools and I have something to operate from. And so what we're doing is kind of crossing the T, because if you're building a vertical skill set, and then what you need to do is understand an environment, an ecosystem in which you can use that skill set. And I do think that an engineering and technical skill set is a great way to get started, but it's not the only way to get started. I mean, obviously I didn't have one. I had another skill set, and I think it is important to, particularly as an undergraduate, to develop some skill set. And that's why I would stress as an undergraduate to build something, and whether it's business, whether it's engineering, whether it's law, some kind of a skill set. And in part, it's just so people know you're good at something, and then develop an understanding. I think it can be a little bit dangerous for your career to just sort of wander aimlessly. I will also say that I think a good liberal education and a good liberal arts education is a great skill set. It teaches you critical thinking skills, but you've got to have something to build off of. I really believe that. It's why, we're creating an undergraduate minor at Embry Riddle, and that is much more, it stresses much more technical skills. An undergraduate minor in space. You can do other things and come into space. Now, let me get to the question of career transitions. Almost all of the students who come into our program have some skill set. Most of, I would say, I don't really know the numbers. I should be able to figure this out. But I would say probably of the 500 or so students we've got, probably 300 of them are kind of mid-career. So they're already doing something. A lot of them have been in the military for 5 years or something, and maybe they've been doing maintenance on aircraft, and I don't really want to do this. I can do more. Great. You've got a skill set. Let's teach you about the space ecosystem. And so what we're doing in a way isn't just teaching them about everything, but letting them explore the space ecosystem, because they don't know. They're coming from aviation. Maybe they've been working in marketing in a company. Maybe they've been doing engineering in a space company, but they really want to step up and become a manager, a leader of run their own company in a lot of cases. But I think it's really important they understand the whole system, so they know where the opportunities are. And one of the things is, and I get this with most of the students coming in, they have misconceptions about things. And so I'll just pick on one of my favorite hobby horses, reusable launch vehicles. Reusability is great. I mean, there are actually lots of good things about reusability, but it doesn't make a launch vehicle free. The launch vehicle itself, the hardware, if you take the whole hunk of hardware, everything it takes to build it, might be 40% of your total cost. So if you got that vehicle for free, you still have 60% of your cost to worry about. And in many ways, that's not the best cost target, because even as you do things reusably, you might knock your material costs or your production costs in half. And so now you're talking about you've knocked 20% of your cost. That is not revolutionizing space transportation. And so there are myths like that exist throughout the industry, where there are other things that have to do with satellite constellations and things like that. It is really, really hard to take a satellite and communicate broadband data to a phone which has an antenna this size. It is really, really hard, and you need to understand these things, and then you'll understand where the value is in space, and you'll avoid beating your head against the wall in a part of the industry that just may not. There are lots of parts of this industry that do not make sense, which is one of the reasons my students call it cosmic curmudgeon.
I love that. I think that's
sorry, that's a little bit of a rant, but it's true.
No, please get passionate. We love to hear it. Yeah, I think you've really hit the nail on the head there. I think having a full, like you said, having a full understanding of the ecosystem to kind of identify where the opportunities are is so important. And just to kind of go back to your first part of the answer, I think that's so key to anyone listening to this who, you know, is maybe not is maybe to take their first steps yet. That's such good advice to hone in on your kind of foundational skill, find out what you love, and then if you love space, then take the skill that you love. It doesn't have to be, as you said, doesn't have to be engineering, doesn't have to be anything like that, but hone in on what you love and then take that skill into the most exciting industry in the universe, I think. And I'm sure a lot of people think that, because, you know, there's so many people that love space, but, you know, once you combine this is kind of how I felt when I joined EVONA. You know, I went to my interview and I said, I love space so much. I think it's so cool. I think it's magic and I love writing, but I don't really have any knowledge of engineering and etc. And they said that's all we could ask for, is that you love what you do and you want to do it for space and you love space. And I said, I absolutely do. And I think it's a really amazing opportunity to be able to combine something that something that I knew I'd be doing as a career, you know, studied English writing, but just a life. I don't know how anyone could not have a lifelong love of space. And I think it's something that I really like, kind of love opening people's eyes up to, is that it's open to anyone. If you want to be a chef, if you want to be an artist, if you want to work on reception and answer the phones, you can do that. You can set your sights wherever you want to, but you could be doing it for a space organization that is, you know, and I think that's incredible. I think it's, yeah, as I said, a lot of people don't realize that. So yeah, I think hopefully we can turn some people onto that through these conversations.
Obviously, I agree. This is my passion right now. Well, that's it. This is, I keep saying this will be the last job I have.
Yeah. Well, so you said you tried to retire before. It sounds like they're pulling you back in. You can't stay away.
I did. I don't think my wife is convinced I will never retire from this. I will just be, at some point I won't be able to do it, and other people will take over, and maybe they'll trot me out in my wheelchair and do my
Still having an input though.
Do my curmudgeonly stuff, and
you'll still be chiming in though, I'm sure, still be having a very valuable input until that point where it's a very funny image. I think, Andrew, I think some really great, just a great place to kind of close this and to round off, to give some even more tangible advice. We've given some people some really great points to kind of go off here. But we've kind of discussed your journey, where you've been, where you started. Over those years, what would you say were the best resources that you identified and utilized that helped you kind of segue into where you are today and follow your passions, whether that's courses, programs, or mentors? Because, you know, I personally at EVONA, we place so much emphasis on the importance of connections and networking and mentors, and, you know, getting in the room, going to these programs and these courses and these speeches. And I think, yeah, it's a really interesting one to kind of ask our guests, because it's as I said, it's such tangible advice for people to go off and act on themselves.
That's a really good question. So I think the first and most important resource are teachers. And those are the people that exposed me to the things that I got passionate about. And maybe it was their passion for the topic that got me excited about it. So that's incredibly important. And the second, I would say, our bosses, and that cuts both ways. It cuts one way that, I mean, for me, I did really well when I had a boss that I respected and who I thought at least respected me, and then I was able to do a lot of things. I was a really bad employee when I didn't like my boss, and maybe I'm overly sensitive, and I should just buck up and go, yeah, well, I don't care. So you got a lousy boss, do your job anyway. But it's a really critical resource, and I think what's one of the things that I think in America in particular, we do a lousy job of training bosses to be good leaders. And we do lots of training and all of this kind of stuff, but And when I was an executive, I would go through these training things and it was go, yeah, what, I'm on my phone the whole time, trying to think of something else to do until they started taking them away. We need to figure out ways of doing that better. And part of it is just making, actually the most useful piece of advice I ever got from any of these sessions was 3 words: be there now.
Yeah.
When you're having a conversation, be engaged in that conversation, because if you're not, you're going to end up having it again and again and again. So that's important. I think the other thing, which I've already hit on, is finding ways to help people communicate. And we do that in our program. You do it in universities, but I think we need to find more ways out there in the professional development community of encouraging young professionals to communicate effectively. And maybe that's a place where EVONA can really help. I think that's a place where I would love to do more in helping people really figure out what is the story you're trying to tell with any presentation. What's your story? And I talk to people who've just finished their dissertation. I go, what's your elevator speech? And they kind of go off about dependent, independent variables and all this. And they said, you really don't know what you're writing about, do you? And so that's incredibly important. And so I think that's a resource we need to do a better job developing. And it's obviously not just space, it's everywhere, but that's what I'm passionate about. So yeah, those would be a few things that I think are really important.
Yeah, I completely agree with you there. I think you're absolutely right. I think the essence of it is that, especially within space, when you're dealing with so many inspired people who are kind of living their dream in so many senses, people build up people in the sector and they really have a want to do that. But the thing but one really important thing is that people respond to passion and enthusiasm. And like you said, be there now, start the conversation, enter the conversation, join the conversation, strike up a conversation with someone who, as we said, kind of, if it's a leader, if it's a teacher, a boss, in general, leaders look to people in the sector who you kind of respect and admire and you think you can learn from, and just start the conversation, because these people are they want to build people up. They want people to join the sector that they know it's such a privilege to be a part of. And it's such a blessing kind of every day to be at the forefront of exploration and making the impossible possible. And yeah, and like you said as well, communication is a huge, huge part of that, communicating as a leader, communicating, you know, communicating kind of advice to people, and as kind of an aspiring someone joining into this industry, finding ways to kind of communicate your passion and what you're interested in. And then that's where your journey starts. You never know who's going to point you in what direction, who's going to give you the email address of someone who could, as we said, saying yes, you could never know where you're going to end up. And it's just, I think that is my favorite thing about the sector, is the possibility when you just say yes and open your mouth and get in the room, because the people are so incredible.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Just from your perspective, I just got finished teaching the class on space policy, in which students actually do an analysis of a country and their national space innovation system, and had several really fascinating papers on the UK. And the UK is a fascinating place to be right now.
Yeah.
In some ways, you've got a clean slate.
Mm.
You just don't really know what picture you want to draw on it yet. But that's a great place to be. That's a great place to be.
Yeah, no, it is. Well, we'll see. We'll see how it turns out in the years to come. We'll see how it goes.
I think I'm spending the summer there at Durham University. We'll see if that all comes together.
Oh, perfect. Well, yeah, if you come down, let us know. I'm sure us and the guys would love to kind of have a chat in person. I know we've got a lot of kind of similar ideals and views on the sector, so I think it could be some great chances to kind of have some interesting conversations and maybe work together in the future.
Sure. Are you in London?
We are based in Bristol, which is not too far away from
I
London.
know.
It's kind of southwest, so nowhere's too far away in England, to be honest. Compared to the States, we are a
No,
piece.
I've driven from London up to our foundation does some work in Sunderland. And so I've done that drive a couple of times. I prefer the train, to be honest with you. But anyway, yeah, the other thing I would love to do is get you connected with our students. I'm actually just developing distribution lists of all our students, but let me make sure I'm not going to get in any trouble by doing that. But I'd be delighted to promote EVONA to our students as any way of getting our students opportunities to find jobs. Is a great thing, and so it'd be great to give you those resources. I just need to make sure I'm not. I never know when I'm getting in trouble, and I've gotten better. But they've been very, very supportive, and I have to imagine they would be very supportive of this. I think I would love to build a relationship between the university and EVONA and the space program in our university in EVONA. So anything I can do to help you guys is all great. I have a lot of students. No, I would say a lot. I had a few students cite your stuff in this last round of papers.
Oh, what would they? Oh, this is great to hear. We would absolutely love to get involved in this. This is exactly, the kind of change that we're trying to exact and going above and beyond just being a traditional recruiter and actually seeing, how we can kind of nurture and secure like a bright future for the sector with these like diverse skill sets and these incredible passionate people and kind of giving them the opportunities that they need.
That's something that I would be happy to. I'm delighted to put my students in touch with you.
Oh, perfect. Well, that's great to hear. Thank you so much. We'll definitely be in touch about that. And just again, thank you so much, Andrew, for taking time out of your day and speaking to me. It's been so great speaking to you. I've really enjoyed this conversation. And yeah, look forward to speaking again in the future.
Okay, Maya, have a great day. Bye.
Thanks, you too. Bye.